Welcome everyone to Siyum Seder Horayot, Masechet Horayot and Seder Nezikin. We're very excited to have you all with us. We're very excited to be finishing, for those finishing Horayot, for those finishing the whole Seder, and for those who just came to be part of our Seder, of our Siyum. So our Siyum today is sponsored by the Tannenbaum family in loving memory of their beloved mother, grandmother, Ruth Zemsky, Zechrona Livracha, Rezel Bat Chaya Kela, on her 9th year at site, on the 23rd of Elul, marking the completion of Nezikin, a Seder that focuses on Rabban Natan, both in the building and healing of society, aptly reflects the life she led. She was a paragon of sensitivity and taking care of the other, often those unseen, in community work and home. Her example continues to inspire us all. And our learning will also be for also the safety of our soldiers, for the safe return of our hostages, and for the refuah shlema of all of our soldiers and other people injured. What we're going to do today is we have a special program. We gathered together a lot of our usual regular teachers to share with us their thoughts at the end of this Seder. So the order is going to be the usual. We're going to finish the Masechet. Then we're going to do the Hadrons. We have a special Siyum Hashas of Julie Mendelson. And so she'll be saying the Hadrons also with us, with her Siyum Hashas. Thank you for sharing it with us, Julie. You've been with us from the very beginning, which is really nice. And we're going to hear from Dr. Ayelet Hoffman-Lipson, Rabbi Shimoni. Then we're going to have a little break. Maggie's going to do a little demo about the website, a few words about the website. And then we're going to hear from Alana Stein-Hain, who's going to do an introduction to Seder Kodshim. Felt like this time we really need an introduction before we go into it. We also, those who haven't listened to Ayelet's introduction, that will be one type of introduction, and recommended if you haven't yet listened, it's already up. And Alana will give a bit of a different type of introduction, and then we'll end with the Tefillah. So with that, we're going to get started. As you saw from already, we started this morning, very, very interesting end of the Masechet, and it only gets more interesting. So I ended kind of in the middle of the story, and we're going to go back and review a bit of the story outside, and then we'll continue inside from where we left off. We have this story. First, we got a halacha, which is the rules about showing respect for the Nasi, for the Av Beit Din, and for the Chacham. And we saw that there was a differentiation of what you're supposed to do for each of them. And then they came along and said that, by the way, this all happened in the time of Rabban Shimon and Gamliel. It used to be that everyone would walk in, the three of them, and everybody would stand up. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel very secretly, and I would say a little bit deceptively, switched the rules one day when Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Meir, the Av Beit Din and the Chacham, happened not to be in the room. And when they came in the next day, and all of a sudden people were standing up for them in a bit of a different way than yesterday, and it was clear they were being shown less respect than the Nasi, they got very upset, to which Rabbi Meir seems to be the main plotter here. And he plotted and got Rabbi Natan on his side to basically try to trip up Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel by basically saying, let's ask him about Masechet Uktzin, because he doesn't really know Masechet Uktzin, and we can really trip him up. Okay, I wanted to just stop for a moment before we continue with the story and talk about this Masechet Uktzin. I thought of three possible reasons why specifically Masechet Uktzin. First of all, speaking of Siyum Hashas, so Uktzin happens to be the very last Seder of the Mishnah, of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. It's the very last one. It's a very short Masechet. What Rabbeinu Lau in his book Chachamim, he connects this to the story of Rabbah was asking for rain and wasn't answered in Masechet Tanit. I don't know if you remember this story, but he says, I don't understand, because Rav Yehuda just took off his shoes and the rain came, and he knows less Torah than we do. He only knows, interestingly enough, Seder Nezikin, okay? But we know, and when he talks about Uktzin, he says, that's like Havayot of Rav and Shmuel. Those are things I really don't understand. And we know all the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, and we're even B'kiyum B'uktzin, okay? So I thought that it was very interesting to compare this story, because we're going to talk about this idea. Is it all about Chokhmah? Is that what's important, right? And what's clear about that story is it's not all about being the smartest one in the room, right? It obviously takes other things to get the rain to come. So that was one thing about Uktzin. Another, by the way, the Hebrew word la'akotz, right? The same root is to blocking the word out, but it's to sting, like to bite, la'akot someone, okay? So I thought that was interesting in terms of the story. They're basically oktzimoto with Masechet Uktzin. And the third thing is what Uktzin is all about. Uktzin is all about the stem of the fruit, and does it contract tumah, impurity, like the fruit itself? And I was thinking that it's similar to what's going on here, because they're not the central character, but they're kind of important, right? That you need these three people in the Beit Midrash, and they're each almost like the handle of Rabban Shimon and Gamliel, and they want to be treated in the same way, which is the same idea of the stem being connected. So I thought those were some ideas to connect. Anyway, what happens in the story is that then Rabbi Yaakov ben, I have to remember how to pronounce his name exactly, but Rabbi Yaakov ben Kishni, I have to check, but he basically goes to the attic, to the, like, nearby where Rabban Shimon and Gamliel was living on the second floor, and he starts reciting Masechet Uktzin out loud, so that Rabban Shimon and Gamliel will hear. Rabban Shimon and Gamliel gets wind that something weird is going on. He pays really close attention. He learns the whole thing. When they try to embarrass him the next morning, he gets what's going on, and he recites all of Masechet Uktzin, and they realize that, they're in trouble. And he says, obviously, I could see, if I hadn't learned this, you would have humiliated me. Pake v'afkinu mi Beit Midrash. So that's where we ended. And he basically kicks them out of the Beit Midrash. Now, they're out of the Beit Midrash. Sim reminds us of that story of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Let's continue on what happens. So we're about, in my Gemara, at 6 lines from the bottom. Havu katve kushiata bepitka v'shadu hatam. So they start writing questions, and they throw them. You can imagine like paper airplanes, and they start throwing them into the Beit Midrash. To have a mifrak, if people were able to answer the question, they answered it. To lo have a mifrak, katav peruke v'shadu. Now, when people didn't have the answer, they would write the answer and throw it in the Beit Midrash. Amar lahu Rabbi Yosi. After a while of this going on, Rabbi Yosi says, this is Rabbi Yosi ben Chalafta. He's often known as the peacemaker, and he says, Torah mi b'chutz v'anu mi b'fnim. This seems very strange. The Torah is outside, we're sitting inside. This doesn't seem appropriate. Amar lahem Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel na'ilinu. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, fine, we'll let them in. Mihu, however, naknesinu delonim shmate mishmayu. But you know what? We're going to penalize them, and we're not going to say anything in their name. Okay, basically, when we pass down their Torah, we're going to pass it down anonymously. Asiku le Rabbi Meir acherim. We're going to call it acherim. You might remember we've had acherim a bunch of times in the Mishnah, and we say it's Rabbi Meir. Now we finally have the story as to where that came from. Ule Rabbi Natan yesh omrim. And when Rabbi Natan says it, we'll say yesh omrim. Some say. Now, they have a dream. It seems like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Natan end up with the same dream. Zilu faisula Rabban Shimon Gamliel. And in the dream, they're told you should go make peace with Rabban Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Natan azo, Rabbi Meir lo azo. So Rabbi Natan goes, Rabbi Meir doesn't. Rabbi Meir, as you can see, is the initiator. He wasn't willing to try to make peace. It's a very strange thing what happens here in another minute, but you'll see. Anyway, Rabbi Meir doesn't want to go. Amar divrei cholamot lo malalim b'lo moridim. We don't follow chalamot. We don't follow our dreams, right? We don't pay attention to dreams. I'm ignoring it. But ki azo Rabbi Natan, and this is what's a little bit strange. What happens? Do you expect he's going to go and appease Rabban Shimon Gamliel? Amalei Rabban Shimon Gamliel nihida ahani lach kamar da'avuch lemea Av Beit Din shavinach nami Nasi. And when he goes to appease, you would expect maybe Rabban Shimon Gamliel would make peace with him, but instead he throws it in the statement that says, what, you think you have the belt of your father? Because your father was a prominent person. He was the Reish Galuta in Babylonia. You think that you can, the exilar, you think that you can take that and that will make you the Nasi here? No way, no how. Okay? So that was the appeasing, which didn't work so well. Now we fast forward. Okay? The story kind of ends, but we fast forward. We're not done with the story. Manala Rebbe le Rabbi Shimon Berei. Okay, remember, there's Rabban Gamliel, who we know, right? We had a recent story with him and Rabbi Yoshua, and we've had the famous story with him and Rabbi Yoshua about also kicking people out of the Beit Midrash. Rabban Shimon Gamliel's his son, and then there's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Now, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, also known as Rebbe, is teaching Rabban Shimon some Torah. And he teaches him this Mishnah in Horayot. Acherim omrim, ilu hayat mura, lo hayat kachev. You have to go a little bit of background for this, which is there's a halacha of Masir Behema. The 10th animal is sanctified. Now, what if you accidentally count wrong and you count the 9th as the 10th? So the 9th becomes sanctified as well. But the 10th is still sanctified because the 10th is the 10th. But if you take the 10th and you say, well, this will be in place of the 9th one, because the 9th one you call 10, when you realize you miscounted, and you make the 10th the 9th, and then you make the 11th, well, you'll kind of start counting again, and you say 10 is 9 and 11 is 10. So now you have a big confusing situation because you've now called 9th the 10th and you've also called the 11th the 10th, and also the 10th was really the 10th even though you didn't call it the 10th. So Rabbi Meir basically says that all of those are sanctified. The 9th, you have to leave till it gets a blemish, and then because the animal has to be sacrificed, but it can't be because it's not really the 10th. The 10th has to be sacrificed like Maser Behema, and the 11th needs to basically be left to be brought as a shlamim, as a peace offering, because it has to be brought as a korban, but not the same one. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with him, and then Rabbi Meir's response, and there's basically Rabbi Yehuda says, what, you're going to make a tmura to a tmura, a substitution of a substitution, because he viewed the 11th as a substitution, to which Rabbi Meir said, Ilu haya tmura lo haya karev. You're right, it can't be a tmura of a tmura. There's no substitution of a substitution here. This isn't the 11th is coming in place of the 10th, because what Rabbi Meir said is that since I forgot one point, since the 11th is a shlamim, if you made a substitution for it and you tried to take a different animal in its place, which you're not allowed to do, but the animal would actually be sanctified, to which Rabbi Yehuda said, what are you doing? Not Rabbi Yehuda on Nasi, don't get confused. Rabbi Yehuda says, how could that be? It's a tmura of a tmura, a substitution of a substitution. He says, no, if it was really a tmura, then you're right. But I don't view this 11th coming in place of the 10th, right, and bringing it as a shlamim. It's a shlamim, it's not a substitution. Okay, this seems like a very odd, right, thing to be talking about here. Why are we talking about tmura, substitution? I don't know if your brain's working and thinking in these lines, but to me, all of a sudden, what am I thinking about, right? Substitution. We have, what's going on here is they're trying to substitute themselves in place of Rabban Shimon and Gamliel, right? So we're going to get back to this in a minute, but you can already start thinking. So he quotes Rabbi Meir, but he quotes it in the name of acherim. Amar lo, mihem alalu shemehem anu shotim u'shmotam ein anu mazkirim. Okay, like a classic child, Rabbi Shimon says, what's going on here? Why are you not mentioning, right? The kids always ask the good questions. That's why I said classic child, right? They key in on the what's going on right away. And he says, who are these people that were drinking their water and our names we're not mentioning, right? It almost sounds like Rabbi Yosi, like how could the Torah be outside and we're sitting inside, right? Things are off kilter here. He says, how are we drinking their water and we're not even mentioning their name? Marley, now we're talking we're talking a generation later. They're not even alive anymore, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Natan. These are people who try to uproot the respect of our family. So comes the son, and he says, but they're gone. They're not alive anymore. Their hatred is not alive. Right? Their love, their hatred. It's a pasuk in Kohelet, right? And their kinah, their jealousy is no longer here. So why are you bearing a grudge? They're not even alive anymore. Amar le ha'oyev tamu charavot l'netzach. Okay, their swords, the enemy's swords, will always be here forever. Amar le hanimile. Now here he comes, and the son is still kind of fighting about this. And the son says, "But that's hechad ahanu ma'asayu. That's when they're successful. But Rabbanan lo ahanu ma'asayu. They didn't even do anything to you in the end, right? They didn't do anything to Rabban Shimon and Gamliel in the end." Nothing happened, right? They tried to humiliate him, but they weren't even successful. So it's one thing if your enemy is successful against you, yes, maybe that pasuk is relevant, but enough already. So he convinces his father. What does his father do? Almost, okay? He almost pushes him completely over the edge, but he retains one little point. So what happens? Hadra'at ele amri mishum Rabbi Meir. And by the way, if you look in that Mishnah in Horayot, it's at the very end of Masechet Horayot, if you want to look, it says there, Amru mishum Rabbi Meir, this line about the Tmura. Ilu hayat tmura lo hayat karev. He wouldn't say Rabbi Meir said, he said they say in Rabbi Meir's name. Okay, he wasn't willing to go that far, but he got close. Amarava afilu Rebbe da amvatanahu tana amru mishum Rabbi Meir amar Rabbi Meir lo amar. Okay, he wouldn't say Rabbi Meir said it, even though Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a big anav. He was known for his humility, and he still wouldn't let go of this issue, and he kept it, he came up with this compromise situation. Okay. I think this idea of the Tmura, okay, I think, first of all, there's this idea from the story about I think the 3 is very interesting. By the way, there's a whole halacha with Maser V'hem. If you do it with the 8th and you do it with the 12th, that's not relevant. It's only the 3 because they're close to the 10. And I think there's this idea of, there's the Nasi and then the Av Beit Din and the Chacham. They were all this threesome, and each one kind of had their place. And right, what was happening is, right, the 9th was the 10th and the 11th was the 10th, and right, they were trying to move things around. And in the end, of all the things that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is quoting, it's specifically, he quotes Rabbi Meir almost like saying Rabbi Meir should take his own advice, and that the substitution, What he was saying is, if it was really a substitution, it never would have been sacrificed. Meaning, if you really had tried to substitute yourself in his place, you never would have succeeded, right? You were trying to put yourself into a place that you didn't belong. Okay? Fine. We're going to put this aside for a minute, and then we'll come back and pull this all together. So the next part is really talking about different kinds of leaders, okay? Very appropriate for our Masechet. It seems to be here because there's another machlokah between Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel and the rabbis, and we weren't really talking about a machlokah before, but clearly he was in some tension with the rabbis. Okay, this is very famous. Are you better off being someone who has all the knowledge, or you're better off with someone as your leader who is oker harim, who has great analytical skills? Okay, uproot mountains. So one said this, one said that. We don't know who said what. Rabbi Yosi, now it's interesting, probably Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was the one who said the oker harim, because he was the one who didn't have all the Gemara under, right, all the Mishnah under his belt. But we don't know, actually. Rabbi Yosef Sinai Rabba Oker Harim. This is very famous, and in fact it appears in Brachot as well, so it might sound familiar to you. Rabbi Yosef was a Sinai, Rabba was Oker Harim. Shachulit Hamanda. They had to appoint one of them as the Rosh Yeshiva. They sent a message to Eretz Yisrael, and they said, which one should we do? Eze mehem kodem, shachalu Sinai adif. Because everybody needs the wheat. The wheat are the basics. That's the knowledge. Basically go with the one who has the most knowledge. That's what they said in Israel. But in Babylonia, apparently that wasn't their approach. And this is, by the way, a big difference between, Rabban Lau also talks about this in his book, the difference between this is in the newest volume, about the difference between Israel and Babylonia in this sense. But anyway, we don't have the time for this today. Now, according to our version here, and this comes up in different versions in other places, but Rabbi Yosef wouldn't accept the position. Malach Rabba Esrim v'Tartin Shnin. So Rabba was in charge for 22 years until he died. V'Hadra Malach Rabbi Yosef. Then Rabbi Yosef became the head of the yeshiva. V'Chol Shnei de Malach Rabba. Rabbi Yosef afilu umana lebeite lo chalif. He would make sure that the umam would never even, the bloodletter wouldn't come to his house. He basically was trying to show, I'm just like everybody else. Don't treat me with respect. He didn't want to step on the toes of Rabbi. He was very careful, right? Kind of the reaction to that previous story. Abai v'Rabba Rabbi Zera, another story, v'Rabba Barmani, these four rabbis have a yatve v'abtzriche resha. They needed someone to lead their learning. Amre kolda amar milta v'lo mifrach lehavi resha. Here it's all about the knowledge. Anyone who can ask a question and who can say something, and we won't knock down his, we won't question what he said, will be in charge. Jekulu ifrach, everything everybody said, they knocked down. But to Abai lo ifrach. And therefore, Chazi Rabba la Abai degava resha. Bunch of different interpretations here, but we'll just go with Rabba saw that Abai lifted up his head as if, I guess it's me. Amar le Nachmani ptach ve'ema. Nachmani, open up and speak. A whole bunch of different opinions about whether Nachmani was a derogatory phrase about him or it was actually a respectful phrase about him. But again, we'll put that issue aside right now. In the end, he ends up being the one to lead. It sounds like it wasn't like heading the yeshiva there. It was just leading their group. Now we're going to end in a very, very interesting way. Ibayaluhu. And I challenge you to look and see if any other Masechet ends with this last word. Okay, I don't believe it's true, but I might not remember. Rabbi Zera Rabba Bar Matna Heminayu Adif. So we have Rabbi Zera, we have Rabba Bar Matna. Who is the better leader? Rabbi Zera, so which one? Rabbi Zera Charif Umakshe. He's very sharp and he has very strong questions. Rabba Bar Matna Matun, he's much more tamed, controlled, umasik, but he concludes, right? It's very good to ask a lot of questions, but you might not come to conclusions. So which one? And the Gemara answers with teku. We don't know. So what is going on at the end of this Masechet? It's a fascinating end, and particularly because of our Masechet in general. I think what's going on here is we had a whole Masechet about leadership and leaders making mistakes and leaders learning from their mistakes, right? If we take the story of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua, right? Rabban Gamliel in the beginning is kind of living in his elitist world, doesn't even bring enough food, ends up eating from the person who doesn't really have a lot, right? Who's poor in general, but was smart enough to bring food, right? And in the end, he sees the other side and he realizes and he puts up at the head of the yeshiva these other people and he says, really leadership is not about respect and it's really about working hard. And he does this shift. And I think what's going on here is this idea about leaders. Number one, I think there's a concept here of the whole end of the Masechet is different people are different, right? And some people have these strengths and some people have those strengths. And what's the best recipe for a leader, right? Believe it or not, they didn't know it then. We still don't know what the recipe for the true leader is. We're always struggling with this question. Who will be the best leader? Otherwise, right, we'd have an obvious, clear leader all the time and everyone would vote for the same person, but it's not so clear. Some people think this person, some people think that person. And it's always a struggle to figure out, right, how to find the right leader. But in the end, I think they end with Teku saying in the end that it's all about the leaders, like sort of saying that we're not going to find the perfect leader. And we talk about this a lot at the end of Masechtot, that the end of Masechtot often ends with, there's a lot of things that are not clear, that are not black and white. And in the end, our leaders are going to be who they are. Each one has their strengths. And they each have to learn, if we go back to our Masechet, that it's all about finding the right path and recognizing your mistakes and moving forward and learning from your mistakes and bringing the korbanot and moving on, right? And nowadays we don't have korbanot, but we do have the Yamim Noraim, which are coming up in that time of year where we do our introspection, and we might do it on a daily basis, but also particularly this time of year. And I think that our Masechet is ending with this idea of nothing is perfect, and yet we always have to strive at least to try to get to the closest we can to perfection. So that's some idea to leave you with this Masechet. With that, Hadran Alach Kohen Mashiach, Slik Ala Masechet Horayot.